Hello everybody, Michael here for Tactica Imperialis. I'm continuing my tales from the Horus Heresy today. I'm not going to continue the story from Mistvan 5 because at that point the books become a little bit fractured and they go off on subplots. Plus, I haven't read past there, so I don't really know what happened. All I know is obviously it ended at terror. Anyway, the story I want to tell today centres around one legion, and that's the Thousand Sons, because they are now a traitor legion, but how they became a traitor legion is something different to the temptation by Horus in Chaos, etc. So, if you look back at my last video, which I called The Birth of a Rebellion, you will know that in Horus's dream on Davin, Magnus was in the dream and he tried to persuade Horus against turning to Chaos. He lost the argument. Now, Magnus was a Master Psyker, Primarch of the Thousand Sons, hugely built, and it is said that the Golden Throne on Terra was built for Magnus, not the Emperor. I don't know how much of a conspiracy or how much of a fact that is, but it is one of the stories that goes around the community. And Magnus sent a communique to the Emperor, psychically saying, Horus is going to betray you. Horus has fallen, it's Erebus, and all that. Now, you might think at this point the Emperor is going to say, oh my god, I need to verify this, I need to send my agents to verify this. Problem is, the Emperor had warned Magnus not to dabble in that sort of magic, or that sort of sorcery as he called it, so he wasn't going to listen to Magnus because the way Magnus obviously did it was by doing something he wasn't supposed to do. So the Emperor got almightily annoyed at Magnus, saying, you should not have done that, and I'm not happy, and this was your last straw. And between that point and the fall to Chaos, a lot happened. So, the Emperor, I don't know how much, he still had his faith in Horus at this point, I'm sure, because Horus was his most trusted, he was the War Master. Why would he of all people have fallen to some unknown enemy? It wouldn't happen, wounded or no. So he contacted, through his agents or directly, Leman Russ. Leman Russ was, technically still is, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, hulking brute, perhaps not the sharpest up here, it's said. He resisted the Codex Astartes after the heresy and all that business. But he talked to Russ and said, Magnus has stepped out of line. He has betrayed everything I asked him not to do and all that business. So he said to Russ, deal with him, pretty much. I don't know how much of a whispering Horus had in Russ's ear, playing his ego, just poke, 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 and saying, come on, let him have it. I don't know, someone maybe played to his ego, like the word bearers, don't know. But Russ took the Space Wolves to Prospero and unleashed all hell. Prospero was practically wiped out, razed, scoured, clean. The Thousand Sons fought valiantly, I'm sure they did. Magnus would have been a hulking brute in battle psychically. He was hugely built, the largest Primarch, so he probably gave Russ a good run for his money, but eventually they lost. Prospero fell, and the Thousand Sons sorcerers or psychers took and basically zapped themselves and all the Thousand Sons they could into the warp. I don't know how much of the planet went with them, but they nestled on a planet in the warp, or they zapped Prospero with them, whichever, and well, I doubt they zapped Prospero, that would have taken the walls with them and been pointless, but they zapped themselves into the warp. And you think at this point, okay, we're safe, we can recover. At this point, they've probably lost all faith in the Emperor. This is where the fall to Chaos probably began. And what happened next was rather weird. The Thousand Sons were obviously all still human-ish on the inside, but they began to mutate. And of course, if you look at modern 40k mutations, the only mutations that seem to stand are psychic mutations, and even they're monitored closely. So they were beginning physical mutations, be it horns or other things coming that shouldn't be happening, tentacles perhaps, things you might associate with Champions of Chaos on the Chaos Boon table of now. And Magnus was worried sick. The whole Legion was panicking. They did not want this, and it was beginning to kill them, I believe. So, one sorcerer came up with an idea. I think he was one of the highest ranking non-Primarchs in the Legion, and his name is Ahriman. Ahriman created a conclave of sorcerers, a powerful group of sorcerers. I believe there was one among them called Ahriman, who features again later, and they planned a spell that would stop the mutation. Stop it, no more. We do not want to be disfigured anymore. And they called this spell the rubric of Ahriman, as it became known. So they set to work, they created this spell, they worked so hard on it, it took them years, decades, however long it took, and eventually it was ready. And so they began. They hid themselves away from Magnus because they didn't want Magnus getting involved on this, oddly enough. I think it was too dark for the noble Magnus at this point. And Ahriman and co. began. And this spell was huge. I mean, cataclysmically huge. One by one, the sorcerers ran out of will, ran out of energy, dropped dead, probably had their souls devoured by demons because they were in the warp and such. And it took immense power. And eventually it was done. I don't quite know what happened during, but in the aftermath, the Thousand Suns were changed irrevocably. You see, the rubric had an effect on all non-psychics. I think it stopped the mutations on the psychers, but on the non-psychers, it went too far. All the flesh, all the organs, the gene seed, etc., all inside the armour that made up the Space Marines turned to dust. Just like it had been hit with they just disassembled completely and just turned to dust inside the armour. The armour locked shut so the dust couldn't escape, and the souls of those warriors rested inside the armour. So they were basically walking automatons now, nothing more. They had no personality, they had no soul, they could not think, they could not function. They needed a sorcerer now in their presence to control them. The Psychers were unaffected by this dust problem. I don't know quite what all the effects were, but the non-Psychers in the Legion, because there were a lot of non-Psychers, despite the fact the Thousand Suns were a very psychically astute Legion, but these non-Psychers, these automatons, became known as a consequence as the rubric, based obviously on the fact that it was caused by the rubric, and Magnus was not happy. Magnus was livid with Ahriman. He was furious. And he basically kicked Ahriman out. I know it's not a good topic to talk about, but think about it. If he just basically said, off you go, get lost, you are exiled. He threw him out. Threw him off the planet of the sorcerers where they now lived and said, you're done. I do not care about you. He disowned Ahriman. And that was, I don't know what era this was, but the story picks up again. Ahriman's story picked up again in this book, Ahriman Exile. Thoroughly recommend you give it a read. It's a very good book. But if you want to learn the plot now, I'm going to do it now. If not, possibly skip forward the video because there will be spoilers in this section. So, Ahriman went into exile. Time passed. The Thousand Suns carried on. They sort of scattered about into small war bands led by various sorcerers. Ahriman not being one of them. He was on his own, and he became attached to a warrior band as a very weak psyker. He masked his powers, he hid his abilities, and he was just a regular psyker, really, nothing special. He changed his name. I can't remember what to. I should have read this book before I started, but he didn't want to give away who he was. I think he was still worried that the Thousand Suns were going to come for him. I should point out, before I move on to the next part of the story, the Thousand Suns did not wear blue armour. Those who play 40k now know the Thousand Suns wear deep blue armour with gold, very Egyptian style. Back then in the Heresy, the Great Crusade, the Rubric, they wore crimson armour with the gold trim, as far as I'm aware. It was definitely crimson armour rather than blue. The blue comes at the end of Ahriman Exile, which I'm coming on to now. So the Thousand Suns catch up with Ahriman. A small band of Thousand Suns catch up with Ahriman, just a couple of sorcerers, and they work out who he is, they hunt him down, and he kills them. And, well, I believe he kills them, and he takes over this warband, and he attacks a Space Marine crew, a small crew of Space Marines who are attached to, I believe, an Inquisitor, or to the ship's mistress, her name being, it'll give me a moment, Carmenta, I believe it was. Carmenta was her name, and she was bonded to her ship. She was like a tech priest of a sort, a dark tech priest almost, And amongst their number was a librarian called Astraeus, and he still believed he was loyal to the Emperor. The whole crew did, and eventually they fell slowly. But that's during the book. Ahriman kept one of the warband on, sort of like a Fabius Bile type guy, and this guy, oh, what was his name? What was his name? Maroth. He kept Maroth on. I believe Maroth may have been a space marine, but one of the brothers of this chapter, this scattered brethren that they took, was called Caden, and Maroth possessed Caden with a demon. Anyway, that was the subplot of the story, and it all centered around Ahriman getting back at Ahriman, because Ahriman, who I mentioned earlier, was part of the rubric, and he was after him. So after much fighting along the way, they get together and they sneak in on their ship called the Sycorax, and they sneak in and all hell breaks loose between the warband of Ahriman and the Thousand Sons of Ahriman, or is it Ahriman? I don't know. And there was a fight ensued, and it ended in a psychic battle. Basically, the way it's told, their souls came out of their bodies and went to war. Not physically, not psychically, but their souls went to war. And eventually Ahriman won, Ahriman died. And Ahriman assumed control of all the Thousand Sons on the ship, because he sort of was the most powerful psychic body there, using Astraeus as his double, as his backup. And what he did, I will read it pretty much as the book tells it. Okay. Let's see. Ahriman raised his hands. Flames leapt from the floor. Red lacquer peeled from the armour of every rubrique and sorcerer. The tatters of paint spun in the flames. Polished silver armour plate reflected the fire for a long moment, shimmering like the surface of burning oil. So he stripped the red paint from their armour. And what happened next? The flames flickered blue, and the silver armour became polished sapphire. Ahriman looked across the ranks of blue armour. Somewhere at the back of his mind he heard a raven call. A raven being almost his avatar in the psychic world. Slowly he knelt, bowed his head. I am sorry, my brothers. He looked up. The slits of his helm, because he took Ahriman's armour and put it on to gain control of the Thousand Sons. Now we begin again. So he removed the heraldry, the colours of the Thousand Sons, and replaced it with this blue sapphire, these Zenshian psychic colours, and they became the Thousand Sons that we know now. This took place sometime between the Scouring of Prospero and Modern 40k. It doesn't specify a date, but that is the story of the Thousand Sons. It's a very short version. There are 2 heresy books you can buy. One is called A Thousand Sons, and the other is called Prospero Burns. One tells the story of Prospero from the Thousand Sons' point of view, one tells it from the Space Wolves' point of view. Either will work, but I think to get inside Magnus and Ahriman's head, I would recommend reading Prospero Burns first. No, that's the Wolves one. A Thousand Sons, read that one first. Then read Prospero Burns so you can see how the Imperium might see it. And check out Ahriman Exile, it's a very good read. I should stop plugging things, then I have to start. I'm not an advertising channel, I just thought it would be good to share that with you guys. Anyway, that's all for today. Putting this up on Monday, so I'm hoping to get some new gear for the channel on Tuesday. If I do, I will show that to you guys. Start new codex analysis that week as well, if all goes well. And I'll have some tactics videos, psychers, walkers, plus whatever else you guys put in the comments and would like me to have a look at. I'm happy to do that if I can. So thank you for watching this video. Be sure to comment with suggestions or just opinions. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Keep checking out the Horus Heresy playlist for more stuff like this. Or the other playlists on the channel. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy what you see here. I will see you again, and my name is Michael. Thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis.